I was organizing my books when my daughter called to tell me that my husband was being moved to Shady Pines nursing home. The same Shady Pines where I'd spent the last 6 months. The place he'd called temporary and just until you feel better. The place he'd essentially abandoned me in 20 years ago. My name is Frances, and I'm 76 years old. And I'm about to come face to face with the man who destroyed my life. Not in the way I ever imagined I would. My husband, Richard, had been living in Connecticut with his second wife, Victoria. Victoria was the secretary who'd caught his eye when he was 54 years old, and I was 52. She was 28. She was beautiful in the way that women are when they haven't yet learned that beauty fades. And Richard looked at me. 30 years of marriage, 2 children, a woman who'd supported his career rise, and he decided that Victoria was what he wanted instead. I remember the day he told me. We were in the kitchen. I was making dinner. He said, "Frances, I've met someone. I don't know how to say this, but I think I need to be honest with you. I want a divorce." I didn't drop the plate. I didn't cry. I just stood there holding a wooden spoon, and I asked him, "Who is she?" He said, "Her name is Victoria. She works at the office." And I know this is a shock, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think we both deserve to be happy. He said like I'd been unhappy in our marriage. Like his leaving was somehow a gift to me. That was 20 years ago. 2 decades of watching my husband build a new life. 2 decades of holidays spent with my children instead of my husband. 2 decades of being the woman who got left behind while he got to start fresh. I stayed in our house in Massachusetts. I got a job at the library. I built a life that looked like it was fine on the surface. I had friends. I had hobbies. I had grandchildren who visited sometimes. But inside, I was living with a quiet rage that I didn't know how to express. A rage at being replaced. A rage at watching the man I'd built a life with choose youth over loyalty. My daughter, Susan, called me last month and said, "Mom, we need to talk about Dad." Richard had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He was deteriorating rapidly. Victoria was struggling. She didn't know how to care for him. She was overwhelmed. She needed help. And they wanted to put him in a nursing home. I remember laughing when Susan told me. Actually laughing. Because the universe had a sense of irony that I could appreciate. "Where?" I asked her. "Shady Pines," she said. "It's a nice place. They have good care. And Mom." "That's where he sent me," I said quietly. There was a long pause on the phone. "I didn't know Dad had sent you to Shady Pines," Susan said. "I thought you chose to go there." And that's when I understood something. I understood that my own daughter had no idea what had happened to me. Had no idea that when I'd started having trouble with my arthritis, when I'd mentioned that I was struggling to manage my house alone, that my ex-husband had essentially said, "That's nice, go to a nursing home." I'd interpreted it as concern. But it was really just removal. He was removing me. Just like he'd removed me from his life 20 years earlier. If this moment breaks your heart too, just hit like, so she knows she's not forgotten. Because my heart broke right then. My heart broke because I realized that I'd been erased so completely that even my own daughter didn't know what had been done to me. I went to Shady Pines to meet with Richard. He was on the 3rd floor, in one of the private rooms. I hadn't seen him in person in almost a year. He looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished. The Alzheimer's had taken the man who'd left me and replaced him with someone who struggled to remember words. He looked at me and he said, "Do I know you?" And I realized something in that moment. I realized that the man I'd been angry at for 20 years, the man who'd chosen Victoria over me, that man was gone. What was left was just a collection of deteriorating neurons and failing memories. What was left was a person who had no idea who I was. Have you ever felt unwanted in your own family? Tap that heart symbol so I know I'm not alone. Because that's what I felt standing in that room. I felt unwanted. I felt invisible. I felt like the ghost of a woman who'd spent 20 years carrying anger at someone who could no longer even see her. That's when I made a decision. A decision that my lawyer warned me against. A decision that my children said was a mistake. A decision that I knew would change everything. I decided to become Richard's primary caregiver. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but out of something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet. Something that would only become clear as I spent day after day with the man who destroyed my life and then became someone I had to save. Grandmas deserve love, not loneliness. Share this if you agree. Because I was tired of being lonely. I was tired of being invisible. And I was about to discover that sometimes the greatest power we have is the power to choose compassion even for the people who don't deserve it. I want to take you back to something. Back to when Richard and I were happy. Back to a time when I believed that marriage meant forever. Back to a time when I didn't understand that love could have an expiration date. Richard and I met in 1968. I was working as a waitress at a diner near the college. He was a business student. He came in every morning for coffee and eggs. He always left me $1 tip, which was generous back then. One morning, he left me his phone number written on a napkin instead. We were married 6 months later. I was 22 years old. He was 24. We had nothing but optimism and 2 suitcases of belongings. We rented a small apartment with windows that never closed properly. We ate cheap pasta, and we dreamed about the future. I gave up my job when I got pregnant with Susan. Richard said it made sense. He was climbing the corporate ladder. He was making good money. And we both believed that a mother should stay home with her children. That was 1970. That was what everyone believed back then. I spent the next 25 years raising Susan and our son, Nathan. I spent those years making Richard's breakfast before he went to work. I spent those years keeping the house clean. I spent those years being the supportive wife at company dinners. I spent those years becoming invisible. And I didn't even notice it was happening. Richard would come home from work, and I'd ask him about his day. He'd say, "Fine," and turn on the television. I'd tell him about something Nathan did at school, and he'd nod without really listening. I'd mention that I was thinking about going back to work, and he'd say, "We don't need the money." What he really meant was, "I don't need you to be anything other than what you already are." But I was so focused on being a good wife, on being a good mother, that I didn't see that I was disappearing. I didn't see that Richard had stopped looking at me like I was a person and started looking at me like I was furniture. Something that was always there. Something that didn't need attention. When Susan was 23 and Nathan was 21, I decided it was time for me to do something for myself. I enrolled in a community college class. Just one class. English literature. I'd always loved reading, and I thought maybe I could finally do something that was just mine. Richard looked at me when I told him and he said, "Why would you do that? You're 50 years old. What's the point?" The point I wanted to say was that I was still alive. That I was still a person with interests and dreams. That I wanted to be more than just someone's wife and someone's mother. But I didn't say that. I just said, "I think it would be good for me." He shrugged and went back to his newspaper. That class changed my life. Not because it taught me anything profound about literature, but because it taught me that I'd been asleep for 30 years. That I'd been so busy taking care of everyone else that I'd forgotten to take care of myself. And that's when I started paying attention. That's when I started noticing the distance between Richard and me. The way he stayed late at work more often. The way he bought new clothes and started going to the gym. The way he looked at himself in the mirror like he was preparing for something. I remember asking him one night if everything was okay. We were in bed. The lights were off. And I said, "Richard, are you happy?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know, Francis. Are you?" And I realized in that moment that we'd both been pretending for so long that we'd forgotten what happiness even looked like. 6 months later, he told me about Victoria. And our marriage, which had been quietly dying for years, was finally pronounced dead. The divorce was quick. Richard was efficient about it. He had good lawyers. He made sure I got the house and a fair settlement. He said he wanted to be fair. What he really wanted was to remove himself from my life as quickly as possible, so he could start his new one without looking back. I remember the day he moved out. It was a Saturday in March. He packed his things into boxes. He loaded them into his car. And he looked at me standing in the doorway and he said, I hope you find someone who makes you happy, Francis. As if I'd been the problem. As if I'd been the one who wasn't enough. If you've ever given everything to your family and still felt invisible, tap heart symbol, so I know you exist. Because that's what I was. I was invisible. I'd spent 30 years making myself smaller and smaller to make room for Richard's ambitions, for my children's needs, for everyone else's lives. And the moment I tried to become visible again, Richard found someone who was younger, who demanded less, who didn't remind him of all the years that had passed. After Richard left, I had to rebuild my life from scratch. I finished my degree. I got a job at the library. I made friends with other divorced women who understood what it felt like to be left behind. I had a life that looked fine from the outside. But inside, I was carrying something that I couldn't name. Something that felt like grief, mixed with rage. Something that woke me up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding. My friend, Barbara, who'd also been divorced, told me one day over coffee, "Francis, you need to let go of your anger at Richard. It's eating you alive." And I said, "I'm not angry." But I was lying. I was so angry that I could feel it in my bones. I was angry that Richard got to start over while I got to be the woman who was left behind. I was angry that he married Victoria, and they had this beautiful wedding that my children attended. I was angry that he seemed happy while I was still trying to figure out who I was without him. Sometimes the ones we love most are the ones who break us. Comment true if you understand that pain. Because Richard broke me. Not all at once, but slowly, through years of neglect, through years of making me feel like I was less than, through years of looking right through me, as if I wasn't there. And then, 20 years later, when I'd finally started to heal, when I'd finally started to find peace, that's when Richard came back into my life. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. When Susan called to tell me about Richard's diagnosis, I felt something complicated. I felt vindication. I felt like the universe had finally balanced the scales. But I also felt something else. Something that felt like grief. Because the man who'd hurt me so badly was now suffering. And I didn't know what to do with that information. I started going to visit Richard at Shady Pines twice a week. Victoria never came. She said she couldn't handle it. She said seeing him like that was too painful. She said she needed to take care of herself. Translation: she'd gotten what she wanted from Richard, and now that he was no longer useful, she was done. One afternoon, I was sitting with Richard in his room. He was having a good day. He was lucid. He looked at me and he said, "I know you. You're Francis." "Yes," I said. "I'm Francis." "Did we used to be married?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "We were married for 30 years. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I did something bad to you, didn't I?" And I felt my throat tighten. I said, "Yes, Richard, you did." "I'm sorry," he said. And then he started crying. Real tears. The tears of a man who understands, even through the fog of his disease, that he hurt someone. I held his hand while he cried. And I realized something. I realized that my anger at Richard had been keeping me trapped. That by holding on to my rage, I was still giving him power over my life. That I needed to let go. Not for him, but for me. Have you ever cried alone so no one could see? Just hit like, I'll understand. Because after that visit, I went home and I cried. I cried for the 30 years I'd given Richard. I cried for the woman I'd been who thought she had to disappear to be loved. I cried for all the years I'd spent being angry instead of being free. But then, about a week later, I discovered something that changed everything. I was going through Richard's belongings at Shady Pines. Victoria had dropped off boxes of his things and asked the staff to sort through them when I found a document. A financial document. A power of attorney that gave Victoria complete control over Richard's assets. And as I read through it, I realized something shocking. I realized that Victoria had been planning this for years. That she'd systematically moved Richard's money into accounts that only she controlled. That she'd isolated him from his children. That she'd made sure that when he became incapacitated, she would have everything and he would have nothing. And the most chilling part, I found emails between Victoria and someone named Bradley. Emails that suggested Victoria was already planning to leave Richard. That she was already looking for her next target. That Richard wasn't her first victim. And he wouldn't be her last. The coffee shop is cold. That's the first thing I notice when I walk in to meet Victoria. Not the mahogany tables, or the expensive artwork on the walls, or the way the afternoon light cuts through the windows. Just the cold. The kind of cold that reminds you that important conversations happen in places like this. Conversations that change everything. Victoria sits across from me. She looks different than I remember from 20 years ago. Older, obviously, but also harder. Like the beautiful young woman has been replaced by someone who's learned how to survive by taking. She's wearing expensive jewelry. Her nails are perfect. Her hair is styled in a way that probably costs more than I spend on groceries in a month. I have the documents in my bag. The power of attorney. The emails. The bank statements showing systematic transfers of Richard's money into accounts only she controls. I have everything I need to destroy her. But first, I need to hear her speak. Francis, she says, her voice smooth, thank you for meeting with me. I know this must be awkward. Awkward, I repeat quietly. I let that word hang in the air between us. Victoria shifts in her seat. She's uncomfortable. Good. I want to talk to you about Richard, she continues. About his care. About what comes next. I know you've been visiting him at Shady Pines, and I appreciate that. It must be difficult for you. Difficult, I say. Yes. It's difficult watching my ex-husband deteriorate. It's difficult seeing him in the same nursing home he essentially sent me to. It's difficult knowing that the woman he left me for has now left him. Victoria's face flushes slightly. I haven't left him. I'm struggling. This isn't what I signed up for. What did you sign up for? I ask quietly. She doesn't answer. I reach into my bag, and I pull out the documents. I slide them across the table. Victoria looks down at them, and I watch the color drain from her face. These are financial records, I say, my voice still quiet, still calm. These show that you've systematically moved Richard's assets into accounts that only you control. These show that over the past 5 years, you've transferred approximately $3 million out of joint accounts into your name only. Victoria tries to speak, but I hold up my hand. I'm not finished, I say. These emails show that you've been planning to leave Richard for at least 2 years. These emails show conversations with someone named Bradley. These emails show that you've done this before. That Richard isn't your first victim. Low piano as truth unfolds. Victoria's hands are shaking now. She says, Francis, I can explain. Explain what? I ask. Explain how you seduced my husband when you were 28 years old? Explain how you destroyed my family? Explain how you've spent the last 20 years taking everything from him, and now that he's sick, you're abandoning him the same way he abandoned me? Victoria looks around the coffee shop. People are starting to notice. They're starting to listen. And I can see her calculating. I can see her trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. You don't understand, she says, her voice desperate now. Richard was already unhappy when I met him. He was looking for something. I didn't seduce him. We fell in love. Love, I say. The word tastes bitter in my mouth. You didn't love Richard. You loved his money. You loved his status. You loved what he could give you. And the moment he stopped being useful, the moment he became someone who needed care instead of someone who could provide for you, you were done. Have you ever spoken the truth and still been blamed? Tap heart symbol if that pain feels familiar. Because that's what Victoria tries to do next. She tries to make me the villain. You're just bitter, she says. You're a bitter ex-wife who's angry that Richard chose me over you. This isn't about protecting Richard. This is about revenge. I look at Victoria, and I see something I haven't seen in 20 years. I see her clearly. I see the predator underneath the beautiful exterior. I see the woman who has learned how to take from people and walk away before they realize what's been done to them. Maybe I am bitter, I say quietly. Maybe I have every right to be bitter. But this isn't about me. This is about the fact that you've committed fraud. This is about the fact that you've systematically stolen from a man who can no longer defend himself. This is about the fact that you're planning to walk away with everything while leaving him with nothing. I pull out another document. This one is different. This one is a police report. From 15 years ago. From a man named Charles Hartford, who filed charges against Victoria for financial exploitation. Charges that were dropped when Charles died suddenly of a heart attack. You've done this before, I say. Charles Hartford. He was 62 years old. He was wealthy. He was lonely. And you became his companion. And when he died, you inherited everything. His children tried to challenge the will, but by then it was too late. Victoria's face has gone completely white. How did you? I hired an investigator, I say. The same way I assume you've been investigated before. The same way I assume you've been very careful to cover your tracks. But Richard's children deserve to know who you are. Richard's children deserve to know that their inheritance is being stolen by someone who never loved their father. Silence after the final revelation. The coffee shop is absolutely silent now. Everyone is listening. Everyone is watching Victoria realize that she's been caught. That the beautiful mask she's been wearing for 20 years has finally cracked. What do you want? Victoria asks, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to return Richard's money, I say. I want you to sign documents transferring control back to his children. I want you to walk away from Richard's life the way you were planning to anyway. But I want you to do it without taking everything from him. And if I don't? Victoria asks. Then I go to the police, I say. Then I show them these documents. Then I show them the pattern. Then I let them investigate Charles Hartford's death. Then I let them investigate Bradley and whoever else you've targeted. Then I make sure that everyone knows exactly who you are. Victoria stares at me for a long moment. Then she says something that makes my blood run cold. You think you've won, she says. You think you've exposed me. But you don't understand, Francis. Richard chose me. He chose me over you. And no amount of evidence or investigation or police reports will ever change that fact. He looked at you, his wife of 30 years, and he decided I was better. That's something you'll have to live with for the rest of your life. When family turns against you, the silence hurts more than the words. Comment true if you've lived this. Because Victoria is right. Richard did choose her. And that choice, that rejection, is something I'll carry forever. But what Victoria doesn't understand is that her power over me ended the moment I stopped caring about what Richard thought of me. I stand up. I gather my documents. And I say very quietly, you're right, Victoria. Richard did choose you. But look what his choice bought him. Look where his choice led him. And look at yourself. Look at what you've become. You're a woman who destroys people for money. You're a woman who will end up alone because eventually everyone sees what you are. And that, Victoria, is a life sentence. I turn to leave, but then I stop. I turn back to Victoria, and I say one more thing. I'm giving you 48 hours to return Richard's assets. If you don't, I'm going to the police. If you don't, I'm going to make sure that Bradley knows exactly who you are. If you don't, I'm going to make sure that your entire life falls apart the way you've tried to make Richard's life fall apart. As I walk out of that coffee shop, I feel something I haven't felt in 20 years. I feel powerful. Not because I've destroyed Victoria, but because I've finally stood up for something. Because I've finally used my voice. Because I've finally stopped being the invisible woman who lets things happen to her. But what I don't know yet, what I'm about to discover in the parking lot, is that Victoria has one more card to play. One final move that will change everything I thought I understood about Richard, about our marriage, and about why he really left me all those years ago. Sometimes all you have left is your dignity. Share this if you'd still choose respect over riches. Because dignity is all I have left. But it's enough. It has to be enough. If this moment made your heart ache, please like this, for every mother who has never heard. Because I was heard. By that coffee shop full of strangers. By Victoria. By myself. And that's where real power comes from. Not from revenge, but from truth. The courtroom is silent in the way that courtrooms become silent when something momentous is about to happen. It's a silence that holds consequence. That holds the weight of decisions that will echo through the rest of someone's life. The judge sits elevated above everything. Victoria sits at the defendant's table with her attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. My children, Susan and Nathan, sit in the gallery behind me. They came because I asked them to, because I told them they needed to understand what had been done to their father. The charges are clear. Financial exploitation of an elderly person.
Fraud. Forgery.
The district attorney stands and presents the evidence. The power of attorney documents. The bank transfers. The emails planning Victoria's departure. The pattern with Charles Hartford. Victoria's attorney tries to argue that she was merely managing her husband's finances with his consent. That the power of attorney was legitimate. That I am simply a bitter ex-wife trying to cause trouble. But then the prosecutor presents something that changes everything. Your Honor, she says, we have additional evidence that was discovered during our investigation. Evidence that shows Mrs. Victoria Reynolds not only defrauded her husband, but that she deliberately orchestrated his decline. The courtroom goes very still. The prosecutor pulls out medical records. Records showing that Victoria had been giving Richard medications that weren't prescribed to him. Medications that would accelerate cognitive decline. Medications that would make his Alzheimer's progress faster than it naturally would. We consulted with 3 neurologists, the prosecutor continues. All 3 confirmed that the medications found in Mr. Reynolds' system would have worsened his condition significantly. That without these medications, his decline would have been much slower. That Victoria Reynolds was deliberately making her husband sicker so she could gain control of his assets faster. I feel my breath catch in my throat. I look at Victoria, and I see her face go pale. I see her attorney whisper something urgent to her. I see her hands start to shake. Susan, sitting behind me, makes a sound. A gasp.
Assobe.
I reach back and squeeze her hand. The prosecutor continues. Furthermore, we have testimony from Richard Reynolds' physician, Dr. Martin Shaw, who will testify that he never prescribed these medications. That he specifically warned Mrs. Reynolds against giving her husband anything that wasn't prescribed. That Mrs. Reynolds assured him she would follow medical advice. Dr. Shaw is called to the stand. He's an older man with kind eyes and a steady voice. He explains, in careful medical language, that Richard's decline was unnaturally rapid. That he'd suspected something was wrong, but had no proof. That he tried to intervene, but Victoria had changed doctors. I believe, Dr. Shaw says quietly, that if Mr. Reynolds had received proper care, he would still be relatively functional today. He would still recognize his children. He would still have quality of life. But Mrs. Reynolds chose a different path. She chose to accelerate his decline so she could take control of his finances. The courtroom erupts in whispers. The judge calls for order. Victoria's attorney stands up and says, Your Honor, this is speculation. There's no proof that my client deliberately gave her husband these medications. Actually, the prosecutor says, we have proof. We have pharmacy records showing that Mrs. Reynolds filled prescriptions under false names. We have security camera footage showing her purchasing medications at multiple pharmacies. We have emails where she discusses needing to speed things along with someone named Bradley. She plays the recording. Victoria's voice comes through the speakers, cold and calculating. Richard's decline is taking too long. I need access to his accounts now. Bradley says I need to be more aggressive. If seeing truth when gives you hope, tap heart symbol so more people see this. Because in that moment, watching Victoria realize she's been completely exposed, I feel something I haven't felt in 20 years. I feel like the universe has finally balanced the scales. The judge looks at Victoria with an expression of disgust. Mrs. Reynolds, do you have anything to say? Victoria stands up. And she does something I don't expect.
She cries.
Real tears. She says, I'm sorry. I was desperate. Richard wasn't the man I married anymore. He'd become difficult. He was forgetting things. I was losing the life I'd built. I just wanted to protect myself. By poisoning her husband? The judge asks, his voice cold. I wasn't poisoning him, Victoria says desperately. I was trying to help him along. He was going to decline anyway. I was just speeding up the inevitable. You were murdering him slowly, the judge says. That's what you were doing. The courtroom is absolutely silent now. Everyone is staring at Victoria. Everyone is understanding, for the first time, the full extent of what she's done.
Susan stands up in the gallery.
Her voice is shaking. How could you do that to my father? How could you hurt him like that? He loved you. He left our mother for you. And you destroyed him. Victoria turns to look at Susan. And she says something that makes my blood run cold. Your father was already destroyed when I met him. He was a broken man living a broken life with a broken woman. I gave him 20 years of happiness. I gave him everything he wanted. And when he stopped being useful, I did what I had to do to survive. She looks at me then. Your mother was never enough for him, Susan. That's why he left her. That's why he chose me. Because I was everything she wasn't. And I don't regret any of it. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always comes. Comment true if you believe that. Because justice has come. Not just for Richard, but for me. For the woman who was told she wasn't enough. For the woman who watched her husband choose youth over loyalty. For the woman who spent 20 years being invisible. The judge delivers his verdict. Victoria is sentenced to 15 years in state prison for financial exploitation, fraud, and attempted murder. Her assets are seized. Richard's money is returned to his estate. His children will control it now. Victoria is led away in handcuffs. She doesn't look back. She doesn't apologize. She just walks away, and I watch her disappear through a door that will close behind her for a very long time. After the hearing, I sit in my car in the courthouse parking lot. Susan sits in the passenger seat. She's crying. Not for Victoria, but for her father. For what was done to him.
For the years that were stolen from him.
Mom, she says, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not seeing what was happening. For not protecting Dad. For not protecting you. I take my daughter's hand. You didn't know, I say. None of us knew. Victoria was very good at hiding what she was.
But you saw it, Susan says.
You found the evidence. You saved Dad. I didn't save him, I say quietly. I just made sure he wasn't alone. I made sure someone was fighting for him. They thought she was weak. She showed them what real strength looks like. Because that's what I did. I showed strength by fighting for a man who'd betrayed me. I showed strength by choosing justice over revenge. I showed strength by refusing to let Victoria destroy Richard completely. That evening, I sit with Richard in his room at Shady Pines.
He's having a bad day.
He doesn't recognize me, but I sit with him anyway. I hold his hand. I tell him about the trial. I tell him that Victoria is gone. I tell him that he's safe now. And I realize something. I realize that I'm not here because I love Richard anymore. I'm here because this is who I am. I'm the woman who shows up. I'm the woman who doesn't abandon people. I'm the woman who chooses compassion even when it's hard. But as I sit there, holding the hand of a man who destroyed my life and then had his own life destroyed, I'm haunted by a question. Was justice enough? Did winning this fight heal the wounds that were opened 20 years ago? Did exposing Victoria give me back the 30 years I gave to Richard? Did it erase the pain of being told I wasn't enough? Justice was done. Victoria is in prison. Richard's assets are protected. The truth was told. But sitting in that nursing home room, watching my ex-husband struggle to remember his own name, I wonder, was victory worth the price of everything I lost along the way? 2 years later, I wake to the sound of birds singing outside my window. I'm 78 years old now. My hair is completely white. My hands have more age spots than they did 2 years ago. My face has more lines. But when I look in the mirror, I see something I didn't see before. I see a woman who survived. A woman who chose compassion over bitterness. A woman who learned that the greatest strength isn't in holding grudges, but in letting them go. I still live in the same small house I bought after the divorce. The house Richard never wanted to visit. The house that became mine in a way our old home never was. But now it feels different. I've painted the walls soft colors. I've planted a garden with roses and tomatoes and herbs. I've filled the rooms with photographs, not of Richard, but of my children and grandchildren. Of my friends. of my life. Every morning, I sit on my porch with coffee and I watch the neighborhood wake up. I've learned that there's beauty in routine. There's peace in knowing exactly who you are and what you need. There's freedom in not having to perform for anyone. If you've ever healed after heartbreak, tap heart symbol so I know I'm not alone. Because healing after everything that happened with Richard and Victoria has been different from any other healing I've experienced. It's been slow. It's been deliberate. It's involved forgiving myself for the years I spent making myself invisible. It's involved understanding that being left doesn't mean you weren't enough. It means the other person couldn't see what they had. I visit Richard 3 times a week at Shady Pines. He's still there. His condition has stabilized since Victoria was arrested. The doctors say that without the medications she was giving him, his decline has slowed significantly. He's not the man he was before the Alzheimer's. But he's not deteriorating as rapidly as he was when Victoria was in his life. Most days, Richard doesn't recognize me. But sometimes on his good days, he'll look at me and say, "Francis? Is that you?" And I'll say, "Yes, Richard. It's me." "Why are you here?" he'll ask. "I wasn't very good to you." And I'll tell him the truth. "No, you weren't. But I'm not here because of who you were. I'm here because of who I am." Comment strong if you've ever had to stand alone and rebuild. Because I did have to rebuild. After the trial ended, after Victoria was sent to prison, after the media attention died down, I had to figure out who I was without the anger I'd been carrying for 20 years. I had to learn how to live without the story I'd been telling myself about being the woman who wasn't enough. And I discovered something unexpected. I discovered that I was always enough. That Richard's leaving had nothing to do with my value and everything to do with his inability to see what he had. That Victoria's manipulation had nothing to do with her being better than me and everything to do with her being a predator who saw a vulnerable target. Susan comes to visit me every Sunday now. We have brunch on my porch. We talk about her life, about her children, about the ways she's learning to process what her father did to our family.
She's been in therapy.
She says it's helping her understand that she's not responsible for her father's choices, that she doesn't have to carry his shame. Last Sunday, she said to me, "Mom, I want you to know that I see you now. I see how strong you've been. I see how you fought for Dad, even though he didn't deserve it. I see how you've built this life. And I'm so proud of you." I cried when she said that. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. Tears of finally being seen by my daughter. Tears of understanding that even though Richard left, even though I lost so much, I gained something too. I gained my children's respect. I gained my own self-respect. Grandmas deserve respect and love. Share this so everyone remembers that. Because I do deserve respect. Not because I'm Richard's ex-wife. Not because I exposed Victoria. But because I'm a woman who has survived pain and chosen to keep living anyway. Because I'm a woman who has wisdom to offer. Because I'm a person whose life has value. My friend Barbara still calls me every week. We talk for hours. She tells me about her grandchildren. I tell her about my garden. We laugh about getting older. We support each other through the challenges that come with aging. And I'm grateful for her. I'm grateful for the friends who stayed when so many others didn't. I volunteer at the library 2 days a week. I help elderly people learn how to use computers. I help them connect with their families through email and video calls. I help them understand that aging doesn't mean becoming invisible, that there's still so much life to live. And through that work, I've met other women like me. Women who've been left by husbands. Women who've been betrayed by people they trusted. Women who've had to rebuild their lives from scratch. And we support each other. We remind each other that we matter. That our stories matter. That our survival matters. If this story touched your heart, like and comment to honor your own journey. Because I know that not everyone listening to this has experienced what I experienced. But I know that everyone has been hurt by someone they loved. Everyone has felt the sting of betrayal. Everyone has wondered if they're strong enough to survive what's being done to them. And I'm here to tell you that you are. You're stronger than you think. Your pain has purpose. Your survival matters. I keep Richard's old photographs in a box in my closet. I don't look at them often. But sometimes, when I'm feeling reflective, I'll take them out. I'll look at the young couple we were. I'll look at the family we built. I'll look at all the years we had before everything fell apart. And I don't feel angry anymore. I feel sad. I feel sad for the man Richard could have been if he hadn't been so afraid of aging. I feel sad for the life we could have had if he'd chosen to stay. But I also feel grateful. Grateful that I learned who I was without him. Grateful that I learned what I'm capable of. Grateful that I survived. Some people only realize too late what real wealth is. Richard is one of those people. He's in a nursing home now, dependent on others for everything. He has money. His children manage it for him, but he has no companionship from the woman he left me for. He has no life built with Victoria. He has only the consequences of choices he can no longer remember making. And I'm here. I'm free. I'm at peace. What would you do if life gave you a second chance to reclaim peace? Because that's what I was given. A second chance. A chance to rebuild my life after Richard left. A chance to fight for justice when Victoria tried to destroy him. A chance to choose who I wanted to be in the aftermath of betrayal. And I chose to be someone who forgives. Not because Richard or Victoria deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to live without the weight of anger dragging me down. I deserve to wake up in the morning and feel grateful instead of bitter. Sometimes, even after betrayal, love still finds a way. Not the romantic love that I had for Richard. That love is gone. It died the day he told me he was leaving. But the love that I have for myself. The love that says, you matter. You deserve to be here. Your life has value. That love has found a way. And it's the most important love I've ever felt. Last week, Richard had a moment of clarity. He looked at me and he said, Frances, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you. I'm sorry for choosing Victoria. I'm sorry for everything. And I held his hand and I said, I know, Richard. And I forgive you. And I meant it. I meant it not because what he did was okay, but because holding on to my anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him. Because forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of your own pain. My life now is simple. I have my house. I have my garden. I have my children and grandchildren. I have my friends. I have my volunteer work. I have mornings on the porch with coffee. I have evenings reading books that make me think. I have a life that belongs entirely to me. And that's the greatest victory of all. Not that Victoria went to prison. Not that Richard's money was protected. But that I reclaimed myself. That I learned my own worth. That I chose peace over bitterness. As I sit on my porch this morning, watching the sun rise over my neighborhood, I think about the woman I was 50 years ago. The woman who met Richard at a diner and fell in love with his smile. The woman who believed that marriage meant forever. The woman who thought she had to disappear to be loved. And I'm grateful to her. I'm grateful for her optimism. I'm grateful for her hope. I'm grateful for her willingness to love completely, even though it meant she could be hurt completely. But I'm also grateful that I'm not her anymore. I'm someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone who knows that the greatest love story isn't the one you have with another person. It's the one you have with yourself. Sometimes the ending we get isn't the ending we hoped for. But sometimes that's exactly what we need.